Hello, and welcome to Life Changing Radio's Weekend Magazine, the program that examines the people, places, and events that impact New England. I'm Matthew Fake. As we brace for the high-stakes, pivotal election showdown in November, emotions are running high with reports of elevated stress, anxiety, nervousness, and anger. Even state and local elections are creating voter anxiety with increasingly emotional ad campaigns. With us today is Karen Howard, a former congressional committee staff member with 4 decades of experience in healthcare policy and author of Upset is Optional. Here, she shares valuable insights from her book on how to alleviate election anxiety as she speaks here with Life Changing Radio's Randy Bergson.
What prompted you to write Upset is Optional?
It's funny you asked that question. I had a funny feeling that was going to come up today. And it's been on my mind a lot. It took me only 3 months to write the book, but it took me a very long time to get to the point where I could write it and then to get it published. And I think I felt the impetus so much more to get it out. It was for a while, it was just really personal, but now I feel like the messaging could not be more, relevant in terms of the kinds of strife we've been through politically to the kinds of things that we're dealing with now. Our learning curve is very different on these things, and life only gets more complicated. So I think the simplicity of the practices is right on time.
Before we go any further, can you give us, in a nutshell, your background and organization, what you do?
I've been in Washington, D.C. for over 40 years now, and I'm currently the executive director of the Organic and Natural Health Association, which is a trade association in the dietary supplement space. So we represent the entirety of the supply chain, all the way from the raw ingredients to your products to the finished products, the manufacturers, and also the consumer organizations and retailers. So we have a very unique approach. Obviously, we're very committed to quality and transparency so that people get what they want to buy, and when they buy it, they know what's in the bottle.
All right, so you have to be very aware of the, physiological effects on humans and what stress can do.
And I think that is one of the most underserved areas of health in our country, probably in the world, in terms of what stress can do to people. And treating that with prescription medications doesn't seem to be very helpful. So there are other ways, of course, through meditation and things like that, prayer, and all kinds of ways to relieve your stress. This is just one more toolbox.
The book's title, again, is Upset is Optional. We're dealing with the election, the political process, and the whole concept seems to have, certainly have a lot of us on edge, even though people don't like to admit that. What do you mean by upset is optional? Do we get to choose whether we want to be upset or not?
Yes. I mean, there will always be suffering in the world. And the subtitle of the book is, eliminate upset so you don't have to suffer, right? So it's basically you have the ability to control your responses, and not so much just your verbal, which is always a plus, right, in the world. But honestly, we take so much of these physical, what happens when we use language is that we manifest that language in our bodies. So to be able to eliminate upset is to make choices at every step of the road in terms of how you want to be, what your intention is in the world, how you set your mood, the language that you use, and that ability to feel that in your body is so significantly different than just walking through the world responding to whatever stimuli comes your way.
Okay, election anxiety. What is it? Why does it happen? How does it happen? Who's most likely to have, if you've looked into that, election anxiety? Who would fare probably the best? And what is the best way to deal with it?
Well, so here's my story about that. We've been at this for over 8 years now. And I can remember in the beginning when we were having enormous discourse around dinner tables, Thanksgiving tables, that families couldn't be together without engaging in argument. Now, for me, these discussions have been going back for much longer than that because I lived in Southwest Missouri. and then I moved to DC. So the political climates are very different, right? So I'm quite familiar with that. But I think families were really uprooted and troubled and split and divided when this first political dynamic entered. And that's, basically the Trump-Biden election, right? So now we're in a similar but very different situation. And I was just in conversation yesterday about this silent majority that people are talking about. And I think it's a reflection of the polls not being able to predict anything right now. Everything is within the margin of error. So that means there's a whole bunch of people out there who aren't saying a word and are probably internalizing a lot of their anxiety about what the future is. It's just easier not to say anything and not to engage with people. So I think that's kind of the root of like some of this anxiety, and that not being able to express it, or if you try, not being able to be a positive force in the world. So there are several practices. There are 10 practices in my book, Upset is Optional, but there are several practices that I think are really worthy of taking in and seeing and adopting and practicing, because that's what they are, practices. And one of them is kind of creating a word wall, like finding words that and even if you're not saying them out loud, I say them in my head, and it has the same impact on my body, especially during primary season when I'm watching primary ads. I'm like, that is insane. Oh, that needs to be wiped, right? So find other words, like jot down what the words are that come up when you feel this, like your body will actually tense.
What words? Can you give an example?
Despicable, disturbing.
So when we hear words like that, one candidate, accusing the other of such behavior.
Such behavior.
So what do we do?
Pick a more positive word for you. One would be defeatable, if that's the way you feel. Another way of going about it is to find some nonsensical word. So if you're watching an ad on television that has just pushed you over the top, find a word like lollipop that will literally break that part of your brain that's hooked on it, right? And just find a word that works for you, that's laughable, that will actually shift the way your body responds, because your body can't help but respond to that word differently than it does demonic. It's like language is incredibly powerful in the way it lands in our body. So building that wall of, writing them down and practicing switching out words is a really strong tool in an environment like this. As is turning the television and radio off, but we know we don't want to turn the radio off. So, and we are often always finding ourselves in like-minded conversations, which I understand, but inevitably you will run into something, even if it's a yard sign, it will trigger you, and you need to find a way to flip that switch.
We're hearing about election anxiety, its causes and harmful effects, and how to alleviate this anxiety, as Karen Howard is speaking here with Life Changing Radio's Randy Berkson.
You mentioned serving the 7 generations. What are they exactly?
So this is a very old concept. It's all the practices in the book, this is the one I continue to rely on the most. If I do work that is basically meant to just make money, I am never going to be successful. It does not resonate for me. When I do work that honors the generations that came before me, the 3 generations that came before me, and serves the generation I'm currently in, and equally important, will matter to the next 3 generations that I will never know, potentially. That's when I know I'm doing work that makes a difference. It's a very old, the first time I really got a good feel for it was watching grandmothers in Native American tribes drumming and speaking to this 7-generation concept. It puts you in a place where you're humbled, and you understand that there's service to be done, and that gives my life more meaning, and it enables me to do some of the work that's really challenging for all of us to do.
I like to think of that as your own personal legacy, and especially for the loved ones around you, and how they'll want to remember you or how you want to be remembered. How can those of us who feel overwhelmed by the current political climate feel reassured that our vote counts, that no matter what has been said and done before the election, before you go to the polls, what can reassure us?
Well, here's the thing. What we can do is, if we really believe that democracy is being threatened, and I think a lot of people do believe that, then the only way you can actually guarantee that is by not voting. So I will give you my example. I live in a city that is 99%, 0.9 maybe, Democratic. I also have no representation in Congress. And I think we have, 3 electoral votes. If anybody in the world could say their vote didn't matter, it would be somebody in the District of Columbia. But I would never, ever in my life miss a vote, because that is the backbone of democracy in our country. So all of the quiet people, the people who aren't showing up in the polls, can certainly do that. And at the end of the day, they have an obligation to vote. And not only that, I know how discouraging this all feels to everyone, because I know that most of us feel like our candidates aren't worthy of our vote. Well, not all of us, but, in some cases maybe. But the reality is, and I think people forget this, it's very rare for a candidate at a national level to just show up without a track record. It has happened, but it is rare. So therefore, all of these people start their work at the local PTAs, on the city council, running for state reps, state senator, county commissioners. So all of those votes are as important. Your local PTA vote, that is equally important as who you vote for President of the United States. It is really the heart of our democracy, and it is certainly the backbone of our government.
Just as we wrap up, again, the issue with family, friends, loved ones, colleagues at the dinner table or phone call or something, how do we deal with differences in our political outlooks?
So that's probably the one thing that I think we can do is reframe the conversation. Be curious with your family members and friends. So when something comes at you that you feel in your body lands hard and unacceptable, ask back. It could be as simple as, can you explain that to me more? Can you tell me why it's important for me to hear that? Ask into the question and then let them respond. Do not get in that back and forth, and do not judge in the moment, because no one will hear anything that you have to say. And if at all possible, or if necessary, remember that we can all agree to disagree. And setting those kind of guidelines at tables can sometimes be really helpful for families.
I'd like to just add my own personal experience to that. I have a cousin. We grew up together. She's wonderful. She's my age. She has a twin sister. The three of us all grew up together. We are total opposites, antithetical votes, if you will. And she was concerned about me being who I am and, how I would vote. And I'm equally concerned for her. And my words to her were, "Cuz, listen to me. I love you, no matter what. Blood is thicker than water. You and I, nothing will ever break us apart. I love you forever." Now, exactly. That's my medicine for election season. How's that grab you?
I mean, I think it's an absolutely beautiful statement. I mean, and for family, oftentimes that will work, but oftentimes it has not in the past. So you have to be able to own. You have to be able to own your own response, right? That's the only thing you can be responsible for, and that is to not sit in judgment and to be open and listening and just curious. Like, instead of saying, "How can you say that? That is the most inane, ridiculous statement in the world." Sit back and realize your differences and acknowledge differences. And you're saying the same thing and adding love to it. That always trumps all, so to speak.
No pun intended.
No pun intended.
I like your medicine. I like your prescription. It sounds wonderful to me. I I hope we can get through this, and certainly with your advice. Again, the name of your book is?
Upset is Optional.
And how do we find information about it? .com? Oh, it's
.com. There's a website. It'll link you right to Amazon where you can buy the book, and you can learn about my mentor and watch some video and ask questions if you have any.
Excellent. Karen Howard, thank you so much. We really appreciate having you on the program.
It was a pleasure.
Again, that was author and healthcare policy expert Karen Howard discussing how to alleviate the harmful effects of election anxiety found in her book, Upset is Optional, with Life Changing Radio's Randy Bergson.